In this video, we'll start to look at some operations that we can do with data that is of a type string. And what we'll do now, instead of just typing stuff in one line at a time into our interpreter, is we will put the program statements into a file. So starting with the shell, I'm going to go to the File menu and I'm going to just make a new file. That'll bring the editor up. And in here, I just want to type in all the code for the programs, and then we'll run them from the Run option. In the beginning, I want to use some comments to describe what's going on. And let me suggest at this point that in terms of doing your programs, that you always do this when you're creating your program file. Put some information at the top, some descriptive information using comments. So we saw already that a comment is a hashtag symbol. So I'll just put a single one there, and then I'm just going to put, say, our name with a colon, and then just put your name here. Okay. Then let's put the date so we can remember what day we did this program, whatever the date is. And then after that, let's put a description and follow that with a short description of what the program does. So in this case, we're going to look at some string processing functions. Okay, then add any additional information that you want to up here. Then whenever you print this out, or if you come back and look at it in the future, then you'll have this information that might be good to make you remember what you were doing when you did this program. So we'll start with those comments. Now, I'll put some comments in as we go through the program as well, so that's one additional advantage of using this file. So let's start out by declaring some variables. So let's do my DNA, and let's set that equal to, double quote here, ATT, was AA, if I'm following the example, ATT, and then we'll close that with a double quote. And then to illustrate concatenation, we'll use the plus operator here. Okay, so plus another double quote, okay, CG, CC, double quote. So this illustrates the concatenation operator. Okay, so we'll put a comment, plus is the concatenation operator. O-P-E-R-A-T-O-R. So if you want to connect a couple of strings together, then you can just use the plus sign. And if the things on both sides are strings, or if they are variables containing strings, then they will be concatenated together. Now, if we want to see what that looks like, we could do a print, and we could print out my underscore DNA. And it would print out the concatenated 8 bases here, AATT, CGCC. Now, since this is a file, let's go ahead and let's add a couple of other commands before we actually run the file or run the program. And let's add some other variables. Let's do upstream. Okay, so let's make upstream a variable, and let's set it equal to AAA, double quote. And let's declare downstream, and let's set downstream equal to GGG, and those need to have double quotes because they're strings. Okay, now let's combine some of these together and print them out. Let's do my underscore DNA is equal to upstream, and we'll concatenate that with double quote ATGC, double quote. Now let's print out the my DNA again. So we'll do a print my DNA. Then let's add the downstream information to this. So we have downstream is already set to our GGG, and we want to add that on. So we want to add on the downstream part of this. So let's do my underscore DNA is equal to upstream, and then concatenate that with ATGC. Then let's concatenate to our concatenate. I have trouble saying that today. The downstream. Then we'll print out my DNA again. And let's stop at this point. Now we'll add some more stuff in here later. So add some more later. So these are comments as to what we're going to do. Now, I wrote those down pretty quickly, so let's analyze what I just did, and then we'll actually save the file and run it, and we'll see what happens. So to begin with, my DNA is a variable we've declared, and we just initialized it to those 8 base pairs. Then we'll print that out. Now we're going to have an upstream variable that's also a string type that has these 3 base pairs, the 3 A's. We'll declare another variable called downstream, and we'll set it to GGG. Then we'll start to put things together. So we're going to make a new myDNA, which will have the variable upstream, which is AAA, concatenated with ATGC. Okay, we'll print that out to see what it looks like. Then we will do myDNA a third time, where we'll assign it to the upstream part plus the ATGC, and then we'll tack on the downstream at the very end. So now we will concatenate 3 things together, and then we'll print that out. First of all, we need to save this file. Okay, so I'm going to do File, and I'm going to do a Save As, and I will locate where I want to save this. So let me pull this off briefly while I locate that. Okay, so I have a folder here on my desktop, and I'm calling it CS100 Python, and it's going to go in Chapter 2. So you can put this into any folder you want to, but I'm going to save it, but I need to give it a name. Okay, so I'm going to call this strings. We're working with strings.py. So you can name it whatever you want, but it has to have a .py at the end. So I'll save it. Now the file has been saved. I can move the editor out of the way if I want to, but let's run the program first from here to show you how that works again. So we'll do a run, click Run Module, and then the shell itself pops up and you see the output. So the output shows up here. Now, let's go back and look at what we typed for the code, and what we get is the output. So I'll try to line that up. So the first output is AATTCGCC. So that's a result of this print statement right here. Okay, so that prints out the first line. Okay, then we identify, or we define, the upstream and the downstream, and we make a new myDNA, which goes here, and then we'll print that out. That's the second line. So we had the 4 A's, which is our upstream part, concatenated to the 3 A's concatenated to ATGC. So we print that out here with this print statement. And then finally, we add on to myDNA the downstream part, and we print that out. So this is what you see at the bottom. We have the upstream, AAA, ATGC is hard-coded as a string constant, and the downstream is the GGG. Then we print that out, and we see the result. Now, one thing you'll notice here is when we run the program, we get 3 lines of output. So I'm going to run that again, and I'm going to show you what we get. So let's pull that back in. I think I've lost my screen here. Okay, so let's pull that back in, and I'm going to do a run module, and then you'll see those 3 lines all appear. So now we're using the shell as our output device. We're going to see our output in the shell, but we're going to run the code as a unit from this file. Now let's look at some functions that we can use to process things that are of a type string. So we'll come back to our code window where we're creating a file of Python commands. So we'll add more later. The thing I'm going to add is the length function. Now this function allows us to determine how long in characters a string is. So the way you use it is like this. We can do DNA_length. So that's a new variable. and we set that equal to len, and then in parentheses we put the string that we want to find the length of. So in this case, we want to find the length of my DNA. This returns just a number. That is, how many characters does my DNA contain? To see what that is, we need to print it out. So let's print out DNA underscore length. So this is the variable. DNA length is the variable. We call the function len. We give it a string. So the string is the variable myDNA. And it returns an integer value. So that's important to know here. What type does it return? So let's make a note. We'll put a comment here. Returns an integer representing length. Now, we could add some more statements, but let's just go ahead and run this program and see what the output is. Okay, so we can just go run. We run the module. Yes, okay, I'll save it first. And then we get the shell that has just popped up. And it looks like I did make a mistake here, all right? So this one says my DNA length is not defined. Yeah, well, that's true. It is not. So let's go fix that. And as you learned from previous videos, my typing skills could use some improvement. So LENGTH is the correct variable name. So now I am going to save that and we'll run it again. Then we can look at the output. Let's bring the output over here. So here is the result. So the answer here is 10. So from the print DNA length, we get the value 10. So let's see how we get the number 10. So the length of this string is 10, and you can count. If you count across, you'll see that there are a total of 10 characters that make up that string. So the length function, pretty simple. It gives you how many characters are in a string. Let's look at some alternate ways that we can use the length function. So in the first case, we stored the length into a separate variable, DNA length. You can also directly embed the function in the print statement. So we could do print, and then we could use the length function in here, and then use my DNA variable there, and make sure you have two closing parentheses. So in this case, we have the length function embedded within the print function, and that's common. So the first thing that happens is the length function executes, getting the value 10 in this case. Then the print function executes in order to print that out. So if I ran the program now, we'd see the number 10 printed out twice. But let's continue before I do that. Let's get another variable. Let's do just length this time. And let's use the function len. And then let's just use an ordinary string constant. So double quote AGTC, double quote, close paren. Then the length of this is just going to be 4. But the way I'm using the length function here is I'm using a string constant, whereas up here I was using a variable that contained a string. So be sure that you know the difference. We have a string constant, we call that hard-coded string, and up here we have a variable, and that variable can have different lengths of strings. If you look previously, what we did previously, you see we changed the value for my DNA. So at one point it had this information in it. We printed out the my DNA. Then we updated my DNA. We made another string, and then we output that here. But the information contained within the my DNA variable that changed according to what we did with these assignment statements. So here it's one value, here it's a different value, but we use the same variable, and that's perfectly fine. Down here, once you code something with double quotes, then you can't change it without going in and changing the code itself. Now let's move on, and let's do something else here, a little bit fancier. Let's do a print, And this time, let's add some description to what we're outputting. So I'm going to use a string constant. Print, double quote, the length of the, let's see, what I call it, the length of the DNA sequence is, then a space, then a double quote, and then I'm going to put a plus sign right here. Plus, and then I'm going to print out the DNA length variable. If I can type it correctly, like that. Wow, all right, so what I'm hoping to do is I want to print this information out to the screen, then I want to print out the number DNA length, which I calculated up there. Okay, so we know that should be 10. Now, let's stop at this point without adding any more code, and let's save the program and run it. So I'll do a save, and then I'll run, and I get an error message. Okay, so from the first part of this, we get the length 10. Second part of this, we get the length 10. So that came from those two lines right there. But then we get an error. So there's something wrong with this. So let's go look at the error message. So we have this information, and again, that may or may not be helpful to you. But the last part of this is something that is also probably not something you would be able to interpret, so let me do that for you. This says you can only concatenate a string to a string. You cannot concatenate a string to an integer. So in this particular statement, this long thing here it's terminated by or delineated by these double quotes. But this thing is just an integer value. It's a number 10. So the Python is telling us you can't combine an integer with a string. You're not allowed to do that. That's a problem. That's one of the rules of the languages. You can't. So if we want to fix it, then this thing here has to be converted from converted from an integer type to a string type. And there's a function built in to do that, of course. So let's fix it. Let's do str, and then in parentheses, the DNA length. We'll add another parentheses because they have to be balanced. Now this will work. The str function, that's a new function, that will convert a number to a string. Then you can concatenate the result to another string, and everything will work. So let's save and run the program. So now you can see the output really does print out the length of the DNA sequence is 10. That's what we wanted. So you now have some new information. You can combine some descriptive information in the form of a string with some numeric information as long as you convert it to a string first. Then you concatenate it with a plus sign. All right, so there's some additional things you can use with your programming. Let's look at a couple of other examples that relate to this. Let's suppose we want to print out something like this. So we want to print 3 plus, and then we want to add on the number 4, but I'm representing this now as a string. All right, now it should be pretty obvious to you that this is not going to work because here we have the number integer 3 and we have this string thing here called 4. And we found out just above that you can't mix types together. Let's put a little note here. Let's do error, cannot mix types. Right. So we know that's an error, but how do we fix it? Well, in the same way that there is a string function that takes a number and turns it into a string, we have a function that takes a string and converts it to an integer. So the correct way to do this would be print 3 plus int, and then in parentheses, the double quote, the 4, the double quote, and the closing parentheses. So this is the correct way to do this. So let's put a comment here. correct. When I run this, this line is going to give me an error. So the program is going to stop at that point. So it will not let me proceed, but let's compile. Well, we don't compile in Python. Let's save the file and then let's run the program. So I'm going to do a file save, and I'll run the program like we've been doing. Then we get the output, and as I mentioned, this is going to give me an error. Okay, so it tells me the line where the error occurred. That's what this line is, and the error itself says that we have some problems with these types here. Okay, int and string, so we can't do what we're trying to do. That's an error. But since the program stopped at this point, then I can't proceed to the last line, which is correct. So I'll need to go back in and delete this one out. So let's do that. So go back to the editor, which we can see here. And I'm going to delete this line altogether because it is not correct. So let's take that one out. Now we'll have this one, which is going to give me the result that I want. So again, we'll save it and run it. Save, run. And this time you'll see the answer is what we wanted. I'll come back. Here we go. So we get the length of the DNA sequence is 10 before, and then now this gives me the answer of 7, and that is what came from this line here. So two functions you need to know. String converts a number to a string. Int converts a string to a number. The last thing I want to do in this video is to show you how to work with uppercase and lowercase. So here are a couple of new functions. So let me put that in here. Changing case. So that's what we're doing here. So we have functions that can take lowercase and convert it to uppercase and vice versa. So let's look at those. First of all, we need a string. So let's do the myDNA again. My DNA is going to be equal to just ATGC, something simple. And if we want to print this out, we can do the print myDNA, and it will print the uppercase as we've been doing all along. If you want to print the lowercase version of this, we can do that as well. We can do print and then use my_DNA, then a period. Lower. And the lower requires a couple of parentheses. Okay, so this is going to convert to lower case. That's what the lower command does. Now look at this carefully. The way this works is we're going to take the name of the variable. The variable is called myDNA. And we're going to add this function over to the right of the variable after a dot. So this isn't the same thing as the length function that we saw up above. Okay, the length function, we use the name of the function and then we use the variable inside parentheses. In the case of the lower function, we attach it to the right after a dot. So the actual term for this is called a method, M-E-T-H-O-D. So this is a method, whereas length is just a function call. So there's some terminology for you. Lower is a method, length is a function. What does this do? Well, it takes whatever is in the variable myDNA and it converts it to lowercase. Then that all happens before the print statement. So the print statement will output this in lowercase. Right, now let's compile. I keep saying compile because I'm accustomed to using C as well, but in Python we don't compile. We just save our file and we run the commands that are in the file. So here's the result. So if you look at the very bottom of the output, we've got quite a bit on the screen now so far, but at the very bottom you'll see here is the ATGC in lowercase. The regular version, uppercase, we convert it to lower, we get that. Okay, so that's what the lower function does. Let's do another example, and we're going to convert some lowercase letters to uppercase. So I'm going to make a variable first name, And let's set that equal to double quote M-E-L-A-N-I-E, Melanie. Then let's print this out as an uppercase form or in uppercase form. So to do that, we use print first name dot. Remember, we're using a dot this time. And instead of using lower, guess what? We use upper. And these methods require an empty set of parentheses, so don't forget the empty set of parentheses. So this will print out in uppercase Melanie. Okay, now let's also put something else in here. Let's do a print, and let's see, how should we do this? Let's suppose we have a number. Let's do a number first. Okay, let's do number is equal to 125. Then let's try to do print number dot lower empty parentheses, close parentheses. And let's see what happens in this case. So we will save the file, then we'll run our module, and we get this. So Melanie is in uppercase. So you can see then that we set Melanie to lowercase, but we converted it to upper to print it out. Now we have a number 125, and we tried to convert that to lower, which doesn't make sense. And if you look at the output, let's make sure it's all on screen here. Then we get an error message for that last thing, and it says, hey, an integer has no attribute lower. So you don't have lowercase numbers and uppercase numbers. So that gave us an error message down here. So here are two additional methods now that you can use. So you can take a string that's in either uppercase or lowercase, and you can convert it to the other. Now, also, as it turns out, if it's already in uppercase, it stays in uppercase. It doesn't give you an error message. So let's do that before we stop this video. Let's make that uppercase. Let's make that Melanie in uppercase. And then if we try to use the method upper, then it doesn't give us an error message or anything. It just leaves it in uppercase. We know that number gives us an error, so let's delete that. Then let's save the file. Let's run the module. Then you'll see at the bottom we do get Melanie in uppercase. So if it starts in uppercase and you do upper, it stays in uppercase. So it's not going to cause you a problem. And in fact, I will do one more. What if it's partial? Okay, what if you have an uppercase letter, then you have some lowercase letters, then you use upper? What does that give you? Okay, I promise, last example. So I'm going to save this, and I'm going to run it. And in this case, you see we get all uppercase letters. So if your string consists of a mixture of upper or lowercase, then upper makes everything upper. Similarly, if you have a string that has a combination of upper and lowercase, and you use lower, then everything goes to lowercase. All right, so that introduces some new functions from Python that you can use, and we will stop the video at this point.